Welcome to episode 2 of the Thirtysomething podcast. I'm Carolyn Hendler.
And I'm Scott Ryan.
And today we're going to be talking to Richard Kramer, a writer from Thirtysomething. He wrote one of the truly most moving episodes of the whole series. It happens early on in season 1 when Michael's father dies.
That might be a good time to say that we give spoilers, as we have said in episode 1.
I always give spoilers, Scott.
We're going to, remind you for the first couple episodes, but we assume that you've seen the series.
And hopefully all 30-something fans can go to Twitter, Facebook, and iTunes and subscribe to the 30-something podcast.
Definitely. We are at 30-something podcast on Twitter and 30 spelled out something podcast on Facebook because, we wanted to make it confusing to have it both ways.
Why make it easy?
Exactly. Before we get started with Richard, in our episode 1, where we introduced our plan for our podcast, we mentioned that 30-something was not streaming, and one of our followers sent us a tweet right away telling us that Hulu Plus is streaming all episodes of 30-something in high def. So if you want to rewatch the series, you can stream it on Hulu.
Absolutely. It's about time. Rewatch the series, listen to our podcast.
So we don't want to keep Richard waiting too long, so without any further ado, let us welcome, as our first celebrity guest on the 30-something podcast, Richard Kramer.
Oh, well, thank you, Scott. It's great to be wherever we are.
We're on the internet. That's the most important thing in the world right now. So Richard wrote for My So-Called Life. He wrote for 30-something, and he has a recent novel out called These Things Happen, and we're going to discuss them all. This is just really nice of you to take the time to speak with us.
Oh, well, I love talking about, the shows, and it never gets old for some reason. So it's a pleasure, and I think that all of us who worked on it feel the same way. I noticed that really at the end of 4 years of writing 30-something, that in one way or another I'd always written the same story. And I think that writers always do that without knowing that they're doing it. Because basically every writer has one story to tell that is within them and that they keep trying to excavate. Without even really knowing that they're doing it. But, by the time we did the commentaries, it was so many, years after that I was able to see a pattern. But how the story was told was pretty much left to us with strong support and supervision from Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz. But they were interested in our versions of things.
So that's interesting because one of your first episodes, and I think one of your best episodes, is I'll Be Home for Christmas. And
yes.
If I didn't look through to see who wrote that, I would have thought that it would have been Marshall and Ed. So how did you get that episode?
Well, it just, I guess I was free. Oh, yeah. Well, the last moment of that is Melissa stepping out of the shadows, right?
Well, yes, and I have to yell at you. It's a little early for me to get hostile with you, but no man in my life has made me cry more than you. And
oh, that's nice to hear.
That scene will make me sob like a little girl, and I've probably seen it 9 or 10 times. And I really want to talk about that scene. How do you do that?
Oh, sure. I remember there's a very key scene where she's wearing outside her loft, Melissa, where she's wearing that numbers code.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's snowing. And that alley was in Studio City, California. And it was on the lot where we shot. We just made it her alley. But somebody tells her, I can't remember who.
Gary. I'll tell you. It was Gary.
It was Gary. And then she says, Michael?
Yeah, it was Michael, Melissa. It was Michael.
That pays off in the very final moment when she comes to their house to basically have a scene that we don't actually hear, but we see the beginning of, which is that she is letting him know that she knows that he stood up for her.
Well, and you just saying that gave me goosebumps. I mean, that's how great of a scene it is. And it's early in the series, really, to move someone that much where we don't know the characters that well if you're taking the trip for the first time. But it is one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen on television. And there's no words, which makes it even better.
Well, I'm really glad you bring that up. There's a couple of things that make me think of, which is, I think what really, really lands that episode is Gary walking off alone.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That was the first inkling that Gary is not with the rest of the cast. Was it known that early that are we spoiling things, Scott?
Yeah, well, I assume that if anyone's listening to this podcast,
they've already been spoiled.
Yeah, it's been spoiled, but if you've never seen 30-something, stop listening now, go watch all 85 episodes, and then come back. We're about to spoil something, but yeah, go ahead.
The answer to that, as far as I can remember, is no, because we would have been then looking forward, into the fourth season, and there were things that transpired, interpersonally, all of them good, but that led to that decision to have the thing that happened.
I'll say it. Gary dies. That way no one has to ruin it besides me.
Yes.
It's okay.
And there was something about, there's a line of dialogue, and it's something along the line, like, looks like you're on your own, or...
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. He's got the Christmas tree, and he puts it up against the wall, and the way he moves his gloves, I mean, that's the thing. Of course, your writing is amazing, and the director is, but those actors too. I mean, they're amazing.
Well, everything was understated.
Well, it's funny. In that episode, that was a very interesting episode to do because Ed and Marshall, who were never anything but 100% supportive ever, were troubled by the intensity of the big blowout scene between Melissa and Michael.
Oh, it's a great scene.
And thank you. And Marshall was particularly, he said, I don't know if this is the show. And we were, that episode was shot before we went on the air. And we were 6 or 7 ahead before the premiere. And that was at a level of intensity and sort of craziness that the show had not explored before. The brief of Ed and Marshall was that they wanted it to be about little moments and things that were not ordinarily seen as drama on television. And that one, we really blew the lights out with that. And I remember, Ken and Ellen and Melanie Mayron shaking on the set after doing it. Because they were so overwhelmed by it and so overwhelmed by finding this in their characters. I remember the day, I remember the director, who was wonderful, how he shot it.
Oh, yeah, because up until that point, they do no close-ups. And as soon as they get in, they do the most uncomfortable close-ups, which became a standard of the show in all their fights.
The thing between, and Melanie Mayron and Ken Olin had the most wonderful chemistry together that was, as certainly I felt, as strong as the chemistry between Ken and Mel Harris, which was also terrific, but they were very familially convincing.
Extremely.
And that was just this gift that we got. It was also part of the genius of the casting that Ed and Marshall did. And Ken and Melanie were carefully combined in the casting process as Ken and Mel Harris.
Well, that is how cousins would fight. They would fight raw like that.
First of all, just thank you for that. And the very last one with Gary,
right,
was a nod that I made to the play Bus Stop by William Inge. And the last moments of that play are this sort of guy, and he says to the waitress, she says, well, the waitress says to him, well, looks like you're out in the snow, mister. And then he sort of like puts his hat on. He says, well, that's what happens to some people. And so, the funniest things come in. But that last moment with Melanie coming out of the shadows, first of all, it's so gorgeously lit. And Mel Harris is so beautiful in that red velvet dress, and holding the baby, and with the menorah candles. But my favorite moments for me on the show was where I, or I should say we, could do something that had no words, where the moment was so loaded and so understood that it could be conveyed wordlessly.
How does that work in your script? Does the writer do that? Does the director do that?
It's different in most cases, but the key thing is that we were all literally always on the same page, which not to belabor that metaphor, but everybody understood each other very well. But I always tried to describe it poetically, so there would be no mistaking how I saw it. And also, we all had, in close collaborations with the directors and with the actors. So there was no way that it was ever, something that would be misunderstood. And that's the thing that's changed in television a lot, which is that they have a thing called a tone meeting, which we never had, where you get on the phone with the network and the studio, and they tell you what they want the tone to be. It's very, very awful.
It's very interesting that as a writer, your favorite moments were when you didn't write, when there was no dialogue.
Well, here was the show that was very verbal and about very verbal people, who were very articulate and who were, talkers, which many shows aren't.
You want to go, Carolyn, about accounts receivable?
Well, I was hoping. It's one of my most favorite episodes. I think it's one of the funniest and the most emotional episodes of the entire series.
Oh, thank you. And that's another one about acknowledgement.
Absolutely. Michael and his brother. It seems that it's very much about disappointing each other and not giving a character what they want when they want it, but doing something else later. And is that enough to make up for the disappointment?
Now, are you putting that as a question? Is that enough to?
Yeah, well, that's how I took it. There's a line that both Michael and his brother say to each other over and over again, which is, "But I'm here now," or "I'm showing it now."
Gosh, that was a very personal episode, because it was sort of about my own brother, who Ed knew well, and Ed directed it. This is, again, something you realize long after you've done it. I was trying in a way to acknowledge my brother. His efforts in life had nothing to do with Brad's efforts in life, who, was the name of Michael's brother. But, I assume that you're both writers. You try to do things through your work. Pardon me. I know you're a writer, Scott.
Yeah.
I'm actually a lawyer.
Oh, you're a lawyer?
Yes.
You try to. No, that's a line that I wrote in the final episode where Hope says, "How long have we been talking to each other like this, Michael? Like lawyers?"
Yeah.
I remember that was the line we all liked. But lawyers are fine. But the one thing that I've noticed is, you try to do something in your work that you haven't yet been able to do in your life. And again, this, for a show that seemed so conscious, there was a lot of unconscious work that was going on in it. And, Ed and I never said, "This is about my brother James," ever, until 10 years later. I realize now, give this offering to my brother, who I love very much and who I'm very close to.
Did he ever acknowledge that he watched the episode and that it was about him?
No. He might have acknowledged that he watched the episode, but people never know. People never know when when you're writing about them. There's one detail in it, which is the car going downhill.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's something that happened.
Okay.
And yet, in a funny way, when you're working on something that's working, like 30-something did, the car going downhill is kind of a great metaphor for for the story, but you don't know that at the time. That's all about writer selectivity. That there's that extra secret thing that makes you select this detail over that detail that makes it all add up. And that was something that I hope we get to talk about in No Promises, which I watched a couple of days ago, how that is a perfect example of that.
The details of accounts receivable is something that I wanted to ask you about, because there's so many details in that episode. That's when I really got to know the characters, that they became so real to me. There's in particular when Michael is talking about his dad visiting him in boarding school. He's telling Brad about the first time he found out about the divorce. And this just one detail explained Michael to me for the rest of the series, which was his first thought when he saw his dad, who took 2 planes and a taxi to get to him, was, oh no, Grandpa Maury's dead. And that is exactly Michael clearly has anxiety disorder, right? And that is exactly the first thought a 16-year-old child who has anxiety would think.
Well, that's very, very astute. And that story was a story that Ken had told me, months previously about his own life. And that was how he found out that his parents were getting divorced. And I may have added a detail or two, but maybe not that many. And at the reading of that, you have a reading of the new script the day before it starts shooting, when they're all still shooting the previous one. And you gather around a table and all the, the cast is there and all the production people, and they, you have lunch, and they have not seen the script before then. And I remember Ken just put the script down and he looked at me and he said, "Fuck you, Richard." And I said to him after, "I hope you're cool with that." He said, "Oh, no, I can't wait to do it." And there were 10 examples like that over the course of the series where certainly there were 10 for me, there were 10 for all the other people too, where we would take things that we had heard or things from our own life and put them in the script. I know there's one in Whose Forest Is This where about I Love the Baby.
Right.
And I think I might have indicated that on the commentary. That was the thing that Ken had said to Patricia Wettig when she was pregnant. That's one of my favorite moments in the entire series is when Ethan gets her to tell the story differently.
Yeah.
And but that was the thing about the detail about the divorce was pure hearing it from somebody else, and then me slightly transforming it as a writer to put it in Michael Stedman's history, which was not Ken Olin's history, but Ken Olin and every other actor were very, very generous about blending themselves privately with their character. There was no way that this was ever going to be used to embarrass somebody or humiliate somebody. It was part of the deal that we all sort of realized we were making.
Many times on our podcast, I always point to 30-something as the best character show that there ever was. And I think that's the reason why. It's because you melded truth into the show. Thank
you very much. And I will convey that, to other people. But we weren't even aware we were doing it. We were just, the bar on that show was set very, very high. And if you didn't clear it, you were gotten rid of. It was a bar of authenticity. It was a bar of truth. It was a bar of dangerousness. And that came from Zorkin Herskovitz. Ed said to me very, very early on, he did many great things, but these were two of the ones that I always clung to and repeat, whenever I have the chance. I was having trouble writing, I think it was accounts receivable, And I was sort of stuck, and he came into my office and he said, just don't think. Very helpful. Mm-hmm. Then he said, write the script as if you are writing a letter to the 3 people in the world who know you and love you the best. And what I took from that was never explain yourself, never worry about how you're coming across, never try to manipulate anybody else's responses.
The people who are going to get it are going to get it.
That's very interesting. So one of the things that I really want to discuss, and I can tell that you're up for it, which excites both Carolyn and I, is Hope. I think Hope is a really amazing character. I mean, she may not have the greatest storyline, let's say. She doesn't get cancer, she doesn't take over a business, she doesn't die. But I want to know, what were the writers' plans with Hope? Because in I'll Be Home for Christmas, she does something wonderful for Michael in that final scene that moves us all. But would Hope do that in the last episode? Probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
So what was in the writer's room? What were you guys trying to do with Hope, and then maybe to a larger extent, the marriage between Hope and Michael? Because I have an opinion, and so does Carolyn, but we want to hear yours before we color it with ours.
First, there was no writer's room, which, and it may have been one of the last series that didn't have a writer's room, is because Ed and Marshall just were bored by a writer's room. And so we would work individually with them. And so nobody ever weighed in on a script of mine other than them. I mean, people would tell me they liked it or didn't like it or whatever, but the script was discussed with them, and the discussion was never really more than an hour. It was just, they just felt that, why have writers around if you're going to tell them what to do? Mm-hmm. I don't want to be indiscreet here. I'm not going to be, but it's a famous, showrunner, creator of the moment, who was obsessed with Ed and Marshall, and somebody tried to sort of make a marriage between them, and they told him that they didn't have a writer's room, and then he looked at them sort of dumbfounded, and he said, "But how did they know what to write?"
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to say who it is, but Carolyn and I have a question later on that's going to give it away, but continue.
Well, okay. But but I just love that story. And they just said, later said, this clearly is not a marriage, so, but with Hope, I wouldn't say problematic, because I adored Mel Harris, and Mel Harris's journey on the series as a person was wonderful to behold. I mean, as an actress, because I don't think this is indiscreet. This is, she had never carried a series before. She had barely acted, and she was the least experienced of any of the cast members, and I think she is the secret sauce. The character polarized people, and she was meant to. And she very much represents Ed and Marshall's feelings about their own wives, both of whom were involved in the show.
Right.
And hugely important on the show. But that, Hope is Ed and Marshall's view of women. Deeply supportive, sometimes judgmental, sometimes impossible to read, utterly reliable, indispensable. That Michael would not have any idea of what to do in life without her. And the show is really ruled by women. The women are much more together than the men. Hope does not have an anxiety disorder.
No, she doesn't seem to see herself very well, though.
Who does? Who does? But I thought Mel was. I loved writing for her. One of my favorite shows that we did was this thing called Happy New Year, where she was. You guys know that one, right?
Well, of course, yeah. And while you're talking
was...
about it, I do want you to say, did you write that as a complete foreshadow for Gary's death?
No.
That's crazy to me. I thought that my whole life. What are you doing to me? Because it's
no.
Because Hope gets a phone call. No, you did. You just didn't know it. Because Hope gets a phone call and someone dies in a car accident, and we as viewers, quote unquote, don't care. And in 4 episodes from then, another phone call's going to happen, another accident's going to happen, another person's going to die, and we care. And to me, that is the secret of life. People die all the time, and we don't know them, and we don't care. And on the other hand, it means everything to us. You're breaking my heart that those things are connected.
I wish I didn't have to break your heart, but
you're going to make Scott cry again.
Yeah, you always make me cry.
Not at all. Not at all. I never thought about that twice. What that episode was it was based on The Dead by James Joyce. My favorite short story, one of my favorite movies. I had seen The Dead, the first season of 30-something. I remember Polly Draper and I went, and we were absolutely blown away by it. And I filed that away, and I'd read the story in college, and had read it since then. And what that episode is about is the ultimate unknowability of other people, and particularly the people we're closest to. It's about Michael being able to accept that there is a part of her life that he has no access to. So that show is about privacy. Wow. And that show is about allowing somebody to keep part of themselves to themselves. And that is the loving act.
That is so fascinating. I mean, how do you feel as a writer that I have just a completely different... That is one of my favorite episodes as well, for a completely different reason. I've never considered the privacy side. I mean, I feel like the way Elliot is, I think that's one of Timothy Busfield's best episodes, because
Absolutely.
It's the episode where he's truly grieving for Nancy. I feel like he plays that whole episode like Nancy's gonna die. And maybe you don't see it that way because the first time you saw that episode, you knew Nancy wasn't gonna die. Or maybe you did, I don't know. But I thought Nancy was going to die, and I feel like death is hanging over that whole episode.
Well, I think that's totally true. I honestly don't remember. I remember vividly Mary Kay Place in that episode, playing Patsy Cline, but not the singer. And I remember how amazing it was to go down and see that winter landscape, which was Studio City, California, where they don't have snow. But that, when she stands on the stairs and hears them singing somebody sings it, In My Life, and that brings back to her entire memory, and she plays that without a word about it. And Mel was absolutely... She went up and she read The Dead. I told her, don't look at the movie because you shouldn't imitate Angelica Houston, but go read The Dead. And she came in and she said, I got it. Okay. I said, what were you playing there? She said, I just said I was living in the past and I couldn't get out of it.
Mm-hmm. What I loved about the episode was the consistency between the characters, which is interesting because there are so many different writers. In Elliot, you can see when he's faced tremendous stress, the first thing that he does is drink. In that episode, he was pretty drunk the whole night. And I like the consistency back to, which starts in the first season. It's also very understated. We find out that his mother had a drinking problem. And I like that consistency throughout.
Well, that's an interesting thing about it, because that would have been, a good actor is a good custodian of his or her role. And we used to warn outside directors to not come in with any predetermined ideas, because the actors are not going to go for it because they know their characters better than your shot plans. It was evident to everybody from about the first week on that this was unusual.
I think it still is unique. I don't think that 30-something has a peer.
Well, first of all, the TV thing has changed so unbelievably. What I always say is television has changed from something you watch to something you have to catch up on.
Oh, wow. That is a great line. I'm going to steal that.
Go right ahead. And so television at the time wasn't as oppressive as it is now, with all the things to watch and to talk about. But there are pretenders to the throne about which I am somewhat caustic. And I can speak for every one of my collaborators on 30-something, and we all feel the same way. And but there are things that were so different, like The Wire and like Breaking Bad, that The Sopranos, that were in awe of, because they're genuinely great. But there was an opportunity to do work like that then, and we feel that we sort of invented an opportunity, within commercial interrupted, language restricted network television that was unique. And partly that was because of, no, it wasn't partly, it was totally because of Ed and Marshall were so not interested in being good boys. They just didn't care. And, Ed was at the beginning of a thriving movie career, as was Marshall. The show was, pretty quickly culturally important. Saying that, the obvious candidates who, tried to do it, and some people feel that they did, I don't, are 6 Feet Under and Brothers and Sisters, which I feel can't hold a candle to it.
I agree, especially Brothers and Sisters.
Even though, with Brothers and Sisters, with Ken and Patty being in it?
Ken and Patty aren't writers or producers.
Yeah.
Well, the storylines aren't as true.
God love them.
Right.
It
was a good show. I mean, I liked it, and I loved to see Patty get to work. And Ken is also a great director on Alias. I mean, he directs some of the best episodes on there, but it doesn't have the real-life feel of 30-something. That's what I mean by it not having a peer. I mean, even Breaking Bad, it's an entertaining show, but it's not something I can relate with. Believe it or not, I don't sell meth.
Well, Breaking Bad isn't trying to do the same thing that we were doing.
No, it isn't.
But Brothers and Sisters was a show that was filled with people who did exactly the opposite of what Ed said to me. They thought too much.
They said too much as well.
Yeah, they said too much too, and it wasn't worth listening to.
When Scott and I talked last time, I had mentioned 2 references to 30-something that I saw in Mad Men, which was in No Promises, which you said you wanted to talk about. There's a character named Dick Whitman, and in Accounts Receivable, we see a memory of Michael talking about a Hershey bar and his father in a memory. How do you feel about that?
Well, I got to add Mad Men to the list of things that I think didn't come close. And again, I'm not just speaking for myself here, though of course I'm speaking for myself, but these are conversations that I've had with all the principal people over the years, and I don't think that we're fooling ourselves. That's the arrogance of having, done something that means something to people. I thought Mad Men was just awful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have been beaten to death because we've covered Mad Men a lot on this podcast, and I keep telling people, and, I don't want you to say anything bad about anyone, but I'm a nobody, so I can. Matthew Weiner wishes he was Ed and Marshall, and I've been saying that for 7 years. Every time I watch Mad Men, I'm like, he did the Miles takeover at the end of every season. You don't have to comment because I don't want you to say anything bad about anyone, but thank you for saying that.
Well, there's a huge difference, core difference. I mean, he was great when he was working with David Chase. but David Chase is an artist, and David Chase has amazing taste, and David Chase casts The Sopranos perfectly from top to bottom, seeing things in people that other people wouldn't have seen. I mean, James Gandolfini was nobody's idea of a slam dunk, and nor was Edie Falco, or Lorraine Bracco. And it was just coming from incredible sense of what life is. And I don't think that Matt Weiner has that. I don't think there's a single good actor, except maybe John Slattery on Mad Men.
Well, I would agree with you about character. I mean, John Slattery played his character for the 7 years in a similar fashion, and the other ones really didn't. They go all over the board, and that's another thing. I mean, 30-something in some ways ruined my whole television life because it's like that great high that you never get again.
Well, if you stack somebody like John Hamm against Ken Olin, I'm sorry, John Hamm, you're out the door.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's another one of the secrets of 30-something was Ken, who was very polarizing again for people because they felt the initial criticisms of the show, some of them were sort of centered on him. Ken was brilliant on that show. He was fearless. He was willing to be an asshole. He was willing to be Jewish. He was willing to do anything. He was a real bonus. And I loved writing for him. And Ken was, if we didn't have Ken, I don't think the show would have worked.
Was there one character that you liked writing the most? Was it Ken or Michael, or was there somebody else?
Well, I loved writing Melissa because she was easy for me to write. She wasn't easy for me to write. She was exciting for me to write because Melanie was so inspiring to write for, because there was nothing she couldn't do and nothing that she wouldn't do, and which was true of all of them. But I really, I would, when I was working on a Melissa thing, I would ask Melanie to just come hang out in my office. And this was, she would just read. This was before any kind of Apple anything. She wouldn't be sitting there on her iPhone because there was no such thing. And she would just come out and I would just, look at her, and she was an inspiration to me. And an incredible piece of luck in my life to have somebody like that who I could just, she was my muse, and that's what I still call her. Ken, the same, but he was pretty much owned by everybody.
That's a good point.
Ken is really made up of equal parts of me, Marshall, and Ed. And he was a perfect vessel for us to pour feelings about ourselves into. I liked writing for Mel. I mean, I loved writing Happy New Year. I loved writing We'll Meet Again, which was the one about the past. Mm-hmm. I loved writing for Peter Horton. I mean, the first one that I did, I wrote the first one that was not by Ed and Marshall, which was the fourth episode, which was the one with called But Not For Me. And I got a great pleasure out of writing for Peter Horton and Melanie Mayron, and basically being given carte blanche to sort of make up a story for them. But ultimately, the one I liked writing for the most was Melanie and Patty. I mean, they were all, it was different at different times. The one I love. I mean, Patty, sat in my office while I was writing Another Country, which was the first cancer one. Mm-hmm. Patty was fearless. They all were. They all respected each other tremendously and liked each other. There was not a single, bad apple in that barrel. But I remember when I was writing Another Country, there's a final scene that today, of course, we would do because it would be on cable. The show would undoubtedly be on cable now. But there's the very final scene when I think she says "make love to me," but yeah. We rehearsed it as "fuck me." I don't believe that we shot it because the chance of our ever getting to do that was just didn't exist.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm glad you weren't on cable, because the same scene it's similar to where when Michael's father's dying in the episode before Accounts Receivable, Michael basically fucks Hope in that episode. It is not making love. That happens in marriage. It isn't always you light candles and, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's an act. And I think because you guys had to work within those strains, that it comes off in better ways.
Again, I'm going to congratulate you on sharing my opinion, because constraints are very freeing if you use them right. And, like, for example, this is a different kind of constraint, but with Happy New Year, we had gone over budget on the previous 2 episodes, so we were always very conscious of being responsible. And because it wasn't our money, you know, I mean, it was, you know, and we at that point we felt we were really being given this incredible gift, and we needed to write a show that existed in one set. And it has the outside scenes, but that's all it is. I mean, you know, when you're on one set, that means that you're not going out in vans and trucks to locations. You're not building new sets. So we saved tons of money on that. I felt that freed me in a way. You know, I can't get out of this house, but, you know, how do I make it interesting to stay in this house?
Let's talk about you as a director, because you have the best jump cut in television history, and I'm hoping
I do.
Yes, you do. You really do. And I'm hoping that you can talk to us a little bit about it. Susanna, who is a wonderful character, and Hope are having this huge argument in I'm Nobody, Who Are You? And then you jump cut to Susanna in the bathtub, and it is a wonderful scene. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. I mean, you know, I have to, you know, tip my hat to Winnie Holtzman, too, for that, because that was a really gorgeous script, a hilarious script. And that was, it just seemed like the way to do it, you know. And we had thank you so much for saying that to me. We had great editors, and we had you know, and as directors, you know, we would be in the editing room with them on every moment. And I remember us laughing at the time as we did that.
Oh, it's a great... I mean, it's the best jump cut because it's so female, too. I mean, it really works. It's not just comedy for comedy's sakes. It works within the characters as well, which is why it's so great.
I felt that it portrayed how female friendships work better than anything I've ever seen on television. Not understanding each other, seeing each other in a certain way, right? Then having an understanding, and then instantly you're in the bathtub. I mean, it's you let someone in and you get to know them. That's how women work.
Well, that's, you know, again, you know, thank you, Winnie Holtzman, for that. For that, you know, it was so much fun directing that thing. But that show had a lot going on in it, because that was also about basically Gary's feeling less than,
right.
And that was about this big change in the relationship between Gary and Michael, because Michael had become a successful man and Gary hadn't. And Gary, he was left out, but he also he had a slight contempt for Michael too. And Peter Horton was really wonderful at playing those two levels. I think it's very reductive to say that he was a Peter Pan character, because he wasn't. He was sort of a barometer of the truth that some of them were losing contact with, particularly Michael. Melanie and I used to talk about how we felt that Melissa was the most together person on the show. It was very interesting in the pilot, because she was, and this was the fun of it for all of us, was that she was basically just a couple of lines in the pilot. As Patty was just a couple of lines, and she was basically Rhoda in the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And Melanie came to me, and she said, "Please help me not be Rhoda." And I went to Edit Marshall, and she said she wants me not to to make her not be Rhoda. And they say, great, do whatever you feel like. and again, when I convey a story like that about them seeing casual, they weren't.
Well, I have to say, quick question. Was Melissa supposed to be younger than the rest? This question has bothered me for 20 years. Was she the same age?
Same age. The only actor who was a little bit younger was Tim Busfield. And he had the beard to make him look older.
You said that you had just watched No Promises, and then you talked to Ed and Liberty about it. Do you have anything to share about that, since Liberty wrote it?
Yes. I think you told me, Scott, that was Carolyn's favorite episode.
Yeah, it is. That and Accounts Receivable, I have to say. And I have a tied third is the Takeover episode. So I do have three ties there.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts about No Promises first.
For me, it's when Ellen, we really find out the most about Ellen. And it starts her story off. And I can't say one-dimensional, because there's no one that is at all one-dimensional, but she was a little bit pigeonholed as the career-driven, let's say, anti-hope, right? Until that episode for me. She just completely breaks down when she looks at her life. It wasn't what she thought it was. Her father wasn't who she thought he was, and she had spent her whole life trying to be like him. And then at the very end finds out that her mother was the strong one. And Betsy Blair, her speech at the end is something that I'll never forget.
Well, what season was? Thank you. That's very, very, and I don't disagree with you at any level. But what season was that?
That was the second season.
Second season.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just give you some fun inside, semi-inside, because it's so long ago. It's what I can remember. But I also saw the show a couple of days ago, so it's very vivid in my mind. We were privately convinced that Polly Draper was the most talented person in the cast, and that she was, and I think that this episode was like pure proof of that. I mean, and not that they were all great, but there was something about her that was, we thought she was an acting genius. She was not the easiest person to work with, although she's a great person. I think that she was, she's a very, very intense and very, very trained actress. Again, as they all are. But I was very challenged by working with Polly, and because there was nothing. I've said this about Melanie too, but there were things that Mel Harris couldn't do, but there was nothing that Polly couldn't do. And that episode, I watched it the other day, and these are the things that I noticed. First of all, Ellen is in every single scene. Mm-hmm. I don't think we ever did that. Usually there was some, second story or some, interweaving plot, and there wasn't in this. So this was like Bergman. This was very intense. I saw Ed and Liberty the day that I watched that, and I said, look, I said, it's so weird. I said, there is not one dated moment in it. It does not seem like an 80s artifact. And, down to the clothes. I mean, she was so, she wore clothes so beautifully, and they still look good. Mm-hmm. I said, but moment to moment, I said, it is, and cumulatively, it's happening right in front of you at that moment. And I said, Polly was brilliant at not playing an erotic character, but playing somebody who was very complicated. Mm-hmm. And I just think that her style as an actress, I mean, everything came together on that show. I think that Liberty's script is superb. I think that Polly's performance is extraordinary. I think that Betsy Blair's performance is extraordinary. And there's something that's terrifying about Betsy Blair in it, and you so understand what that relationship was. I think Ken's work is extraordinary on it, and I turned it off and I just said, this was a real accomplishment. I mean, it was. I just said, God, this was fucking great.
Well, and think about that. You know, if you asked people who even know television, they're never going to remember that question. You know, 30-something's going to remembered for Cancer and Gary and maybe the Miles takeover. And just this small episode is amazing. And to me, I would say out of the 85 episodes, maybe 80 of them have that moment in them, which is a great percentage for a show that had to do all that.
Well, yeah, you know, that was a John Cheever story, I thought, that episode. I mean, it was, you know, so smart about how wasps live and torture each other.
But the brilliance of the casting, with Betsy Blair giving a speech about marrying a great dancer, and she's the
I
one
love
them
that.
to play, and she was married to, was it Fred Astaire that she was married to?
Gene Kelly?
She was married to Gene Kelly.
Oh, Gene Kelly, right. I mean,
Yeah.
How smart is that?
That's, you know, it's funny, with Barbara Barry, who played Ken's mother.
Oh, yeah, she's wonderful.
And she's in Accounts Receivable, and she's just wonderful. And just, you know, just a little, you know, bird's eye view of that was that she and Ken took to each other like you wouldn't believe. She, as Sylvia Sidney took to Melanie Mayron. I mean, they just, you know, Sylvia Sidney told me that she thought Melanie Mayron was the best young actress she'd ever worked with. And these people didn't have to say this. And, you know, they had the job. You know, Shirley Knight told us that she said, "Do you know who your genius is?" And we said, "Who?" She said, "Mel Harris." You know, she played her mother. With Barbara Barry, with the thing with the model of the house, that scene that she has with Ken, and, you know, she plays it, she sort of starts to lose control and then holds it back, which was one of our principles, was that you never see anybody crying. And her brother, Barbara's brother, had been an architect. And she knew when she read the script that she was going to have a hard time doing it, and she just said, "I'm just going to save it for the day and see what happens." And I remember what she says is, "Look at this." She says, "Look at the detail." And that goes back to something that you said, Carolyn, about, you know, the details. But Betsy Blair was very married to Gene Kelly for a long time, and that was just Liberty's, you know, brilliant, intuitive move.
When I was in middle school, Barbara Barry's son was in the same high school that I went to. And
Are you from New York?
I'm from New Jersey. So I think it was a boarding school for the high school. He was there. I think he looked a little bit like Ken. Maybe she felt a little bit of a relationship, mother-son relationship that way.
Well, you know, it was just, yeah, and I think that's entirely possible. And at that point, you know, this is the alchemy of a series, you know, and I'm sure that people who worked on any other, you know, good series would say the same thing, is that they just become their characters.
When they call for the dog lady in Accounts Receivable, do you remember that scene when they call for the lady?
Yeah.
That was so real, so realistic.
That was the woman who lived next door to us when I was growing up.
I think I had the same one.
So obviously the country has just allowed same-sex marriages, and when you read about this, they tie it back to Modern Family and Ellen, which, if you do that, you have to pull it all the way back to the episode Strangers, which, you know, goes down in history as being the first time that two men were shown in bed. And you wrote that episode. I mean, how do you feel about that, knowing that television pushed society to that, to allowing something that should have always been allowed?
I feel really great about it, and I feel incredibly grateful to have been given the opportunity to do that and to have been so supported by Ed Marshall at a period when not everybody would have been in support of that. And, there's another thing about that particular episode was that, one of our, this is sort of a larger principle, but one of our principles was that couldn't be an episode that had the gay scene. It was very much about something else. And with strangers, not only are they in bed together, they are post-coitally in bed together. So it is not a aping of middle-class life, the way that Modern Family is, or, a lot of things that people, get so excited about. This was two guys who had, obviously just had sex. So we skip past whatever might have been shocking, which it really wasn't shocking at all. But that the key scene in that episode for me is that fight scene, the prize fight.
Fantastic scene.
It was, and this was again, Melanie being amazing, and it was a very, very good director named Peter O'Fallon who did it. But in terms of having a gay character, we said from the very beginning that these people would have lots of gay friends, and that probably the one who would have the most would be Melissa.
And when it was on, the controversy was tremendous, right? Were you not able to air it after the original viewing, the original airing? Is that correct?
Yeah, but the thing is that by the time something like a controversy happens, you're already 5 episodes later, and you're really just thinking about how the hell am I going to get through this one.
It's amazing. I watched it recently, and it's amazing 25 years later that the most shocking thing about that scene is that they're smoking. They're next together.
Oh, I know. That's really shocking. My favorite scene in that episode is the one where Melissa plays her own therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember how we did it. You lock down the camera and you shoot half of it, and then you do the other half. And I remember one of Melanie's lines, which is, she said, "Any dreams?" She said something like, "Trains, tall buildings, trains going into tunnels, nothing symbolic."
Yeah.
She was very complex because she believed in herself in a way that Michael didn't by pursuing her career, but she was her own worst enemy. And she basically forced the end of her relationship with Lee, even though she loved him.
Well, he was another, first of all, I'm loving this conversation. I haven't talked about the show really like this ever. But Lee was an incredible gift to us. Corey Parker, he had, again, such chemistry with her. And it was, sexy between them. And, yes, she was her own worst enemy. I remember a line that he had where he says, "Nobody's watching, nobody cares."
Yeah, great line.
So good.
And Liberty, the other day, I saw them on Labor Day, said that, and I said, "Oh my God, those are familiar words." And we just were so committed to not making Melanie neurotic, but making her real.
And I don't know if it was in your commentary. I listened to someone's commentary on that episode, and they said that David Duchovny tried out for that part.
He did. That was me. Was me. We saw every young, good actor guy.
I mean, I love David Duchovny, but I don't see him. Lee is perfect. I mean, Corey Parker is perfect for that role.
Well, David Duchovny didn't get it.
Well, Richard, you have to let me know. Does Lee come back?
Well, this is interesting because it's not out of the question that he does. And it's again, this is utter supposition. And if you asked, anybody else,
no, I want certainty here. I want certainty.
There ain't no certainty. I emailed Ken Olin. I told him that I was doing this, and I said, "What do you think happened to Hope and Michael?" And he said, "Michael died of prostate cancer at 61." This is quite.
It was from the radon in the house, right?
Yes, the radon. Oh my God! And Hope remarried and moved to New York, and Janie became a midwife, and Leo, the son, has not been in touch with his mother and sister for 7 years. And I said, that's as good as anything. That sounds totally real.
Totally not how I pictured it at all.
Well,
I thought Hope was the one that got cancer. I thought she got breast cancer from the radon.
No, Hope got it from the incinerator.
The incinerator, yeah. And Elliot becomes a big movie director.
Good, good. Do they stay together? Nancy and Elliot?
Elliot and Nancy, we think not.
Really?
Yeah.
And I think Brittany has a substance abuse problem, being out in California growing up, and being among all the Hollywood. She got involved in acting young, and I don't see it ending well for Brittany.
Yeah, things aren't going to go well for her. That actress was that little kid. She was not an actress. I mean, she was a strange little Cabbage Patch doll. Who we all. I remember Tim Busfield saying. I mean, Tim Busfield and Patty Whitting were very puzzled by this child because she was, she had no idea what she was doing, and they both had daughters, and they were very sweet with her, but she had a guardian who was her grandmother, who was always in a haze. And I remember Tim Busfield saying, I want some of what she's having.
I guess I wasn't so far up with my prediction then.
I like to think that Hope and Michael got divorced. I mean, to me, that's what the show is about. It's about a dissolving of a marriage, and when you start watching the show, you think it's about Nancy and Elliot's dissolving marriage, but what really happens is you're watching Michael and Hope go on a different path, and I don't think they're right for each other. In that last episode, I'm annoyed that Michael doesn't go off with Miles and Elliot and start his company. I'm annoyed that he comes back from Hope, because I don't think they're right for each other.
That could very well have happened, that we would have done that. That we would have seen that we could only do so many shows where there was something at the end where Michael, manned up.
But see, I don't think Michael was strong enough. I do think that they would get divorced, but he wasn't strong enough to leave at that point.
No, Michael was kind of it's so funny because he is as real to me, obviously, as he is to you, which is very real.
Right.
And I think that Michael was kind of a big baby.
I love that you just said that it's real to you, because I actually said to Scott the other day that I almost feel sorry for you and for all the other people involved in the show, because watching this has been one of the most meaningful things in my life. I feel like I learned more in some ways watching 30-something than I have from lessons I've learned in my own life, and that you never got to do that because it was work for you. It was real to you.
My big feeling on seeing No Promises, Ed and Liberty watched it that night, and they said the same thing. It wasn't like watching Polly Draper or Terry Kinney or Betsy Blair. It was like watching characters.
Right.
And so there was enough, distance.
So now you can appreciate it like we got to.
Yeah, I'm lost in it. I got lost in it. I mean, I after 2 seconds, I was lost in it. That's the big thing to say about it. I just was lost in it, and I just said, I'm afraid to breathe here because this is so moment to moment that I can't turn my head away. And that made me feel, God, this was so modern's the wrong word, because it wasn't. It was timeless, And I'm so happy to be able to say that about an episode that I had nothing to do with. We tried to repeat the chemistry of the show. We tried to repeat it on My So-Called Life, and I think that to a degree we did. But it was a very different situation, and it was not being torn from our guts, the way that 30-something was. Claire Danes was torn from Woody Holtzman's gut, but there was a 30-year gap.
Right.
Sure, but you wrote the episode Other People's Moms, and you have a line in it. I watched it last night. Of course, I loved the show when it was on, but I'm not as familiar with it as I am 30-something because it's not kind of for my age group maybe. But you have a line, sometimes if my mother wasn't so good at pretending to be happy, she'd be better at actually being happy. Great line. I mean...
Oh, thank you.
I mean, that was
Thank
just...
you.
It was amazing. And Carolyn pointed out that, again, you have your generational thing that you seem to go back to. So it really seemed like it came from you, that episode.
Well, it's so hard to remember because we all, influence each other so much, and but again, we influence the best parts of each other, I think. And on that show, as with 30-something, Winnie was part of our tribe. I mean, she didn't come on to 30-something really till the end of the third season, but we all were speaking the same language, and it was kind of a miracle. On Once and Again, which I also did, the mix was, in my opinion, not quite as happy. It had wonderful peaks.
Mm-hmm.
But we were different people, and it was a different world.
So we got to plug your book here, man. I mean, you're so nice to because we'd keep you all day, but we need to.
I was hoping we were going to.
But we need to move some books for you.
Maybe I should say what the book is about briefly.
Sure.
I think that the book is a really good representation of the voice that I was able to bring to the Zwick Horskowitz shows that I wrote and that I worked on, and that it's, in a way, it's 30-something meets my so-called life. It is about a teenage boy who is very bright, very cool, who moves in with his gay father and his partner for a semester of school, hoping to get to know his father better. His father is somewhat remote. And what happens is that he winds up connecting much, much more powerfully to his father's partner. And this is a kid who is from a background of extremely liberal, tolerant, sophisticated people. I mean, they all are, could be, pictured on pages of, the New Yorker, as I am a New Yorker reader. And there's an incident that happens that is violent and causes these very, very liberal parents to start suspecting, even though they don't want to, that the father's partner, to whom the boy has become so close, has done something very inappropriate. This is totally an episode we would have done on 30-something. And this winds up exploding the family and then bringing them together in a very new kind of way. And the book is, like I tried to make my 30-something script, since we're really talking about that, is both funny and sad at the same time. It was published in hardcover almost 3 years ago now and has been out in paperback. It's I sold it to HBO as a series.
Oh, good.
And yes, well, that's an endless story, but it has been somewhat difficult to position in the marketplace because it's written in a series of first-person sections from each character, and it seems on the surface as if it's a young adult novel, but it isn't.
It's interesting that you say that, because that was going to be my question to you, is who do you think this book is for? But as a writer myself, every writer says, oh, my book is for everyone who's on the planet. But
that's totally what I would say.
I know, because believe me, I understand. But who do you think the book is for? Because that was the interesting thing for me, because saying it's between my so-called life and 30-something is a good description.
After the amount of feedback that I've gotten on it, from at this point, I think it really is a book about parenting. And it is a book about parenting in all sorts of different ways, but it is about the challenges of being a parent today.
I agree.
You agree?
I agree. But I didn't know if because I'm a parent that's what I went to.
Well, I saw the same thing. I mean, I have 2 young boys myself, so I saw it as really as from the parent view. But to me, it was very reminiscent of 30-something, particularly accounts receivable.
The book is about these fundamentally decent, caring people who are trying to all do their best for each other and are, I said when I finished the book that this is a book that has a terrible secret that the characters discover, is that they are just like everybody else.
Which is what everybody does, right? That's life.
And, you, of course, worked on the greatest television series ever, and I have watched it, so therefore I can give you a piece of advice that I know that you want from me about developing this into a TV series. I mean, it's ridiculous for me to tell you how I think it should go, but I'm going to anyway. I think because it's interesting, because while I was reading this, I was really wondering if you were going to try to develop this into a series, so I was really looking at it that way. And I would suggest that if, in the pilot, that you start the scenes with the grown-ups, not the kids. Because that would help on HBO especially, because I feel like whatever you see first is, as a viewer, that's where you go, which is why, like in 30-something, the first couple episodes are Michael and Hope, and when you start doing an Ellen episode, people are annoyed. But when you watch it again, it's the Ellen episodes that you care about, not Michael and Hope. So I would start it with the parents, which I know is opposite than the book, but I think it would help on HBO. What do you think of that? Well,
I think that you totally guessed what I've done, which is... that's interesting. That's totally right, and I agree. And I think it hurt the book in that you have this 25-page first section that makes you think you're reading The Catcher in the Rye, and it's not The Catcher in the Rye. It's really about the adults. The kid is merely a catalyst. I think you're spot on. I can tell you what I've done in the adaptation is, the whole beginning is about how Kenny and George meet.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good. How is it going? Do you think HBO is going to do it?
It's impossible to know. It takes years there to develop things, and I am prepared for it to go either way. It was funny when I wrote the book. It was really the last thing that I thought of, and I just when they came to me, I said, "Oh my God, I don't know if I could even do this." But then I gave it a shot, and we'll see what happens from there.
Wow. Well, good luck to you. Thank you so much. I cannot believe we've talked for 2 hours. I feel bad. I told Carolyn, we can only keep him an hour. We got to keep our questions down.
I think I asked for 2.
And I'm we cannot bother him.
It's been wonderful for me. What your guys' insights into the show are profound and beautiful, and I'm so grateful to have had the chance to talk to you. It brought it all back, and I've said stuff to you that I've never said before.
Well, we appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. This couldn't have given me more pleasure.
Feeling like you need more 30-something? Of course you do. Well, then check out the new 30-something podcast on iTunes. We also have a Facebook page, 30-something podcast, and we're on Twitter at 30somethingpod. Like them, share them, and join us on the new 30-something podcast with Carolyn Hendler and Scott Ryan. We'll have interviews with actors, writers, producers, and discuss the themes of the show. Thanks for listening.